The Boston Celtics and the Toronto Raptors will face off in round 2 of the 2020 NBA playoffs. Two of my favorite coaches to study, Nick Nurse, who was just named the 2019-20 Coach of the Year and well-deserved, and I've studied Brad Stevens' team since his days at Butler. This preview is going to show the important strengths and weaknesses to know, with the most important being the battle for transition. My name is Coach Pyper. You can follow me on Twitter at HalfCourtHoops. If you enjoy this video, please feel free to like and subscribe. I might reference things throughout this video that I covered in my 2020 NBA playoffs preview, as well as the Celtics-Raptors game that I did an extensive 30-minute breakdown on here on YouTube. Let's dive into the preview. Transition basketball are some of the highest value scoring opportunities. A good example of this is the worst team in transition offense, the New York Knicks, at 1.03 points per possession, would be the number one half-court offense in the NBA, above the historic Dallas Mavericks at 1.02 points per possession. It becomes clear in the matchup between the Celtics and Raptors how important transition will be when we take a look at the transition numbers. The Toronto Raptors rank 3rd in the NBA in transition scoring at 1.14 points per possession, while the Boston Celtics rank 6th in transition defense, only allowing 1.07 points per possession. Flipping over to the Celtics transition offense, they rank 5th in transition scoring at 1.13, and the Raptors are 1st in transition defense, holding teams to 1.04 points per possession. Now, the hard part about quantifying transition defense that I struggled with when I was looking at the numbers and then applying it to film is that if you're a really good transition defensive team, then generally speaking, your half-court defense is going to look worse if you take the numbers. So if you stop the other team from scoring in transition, and now you get your half-court defense set, but the other team scores, it gets categorized as score against your half-court defense. So the hard part with this is trying to figure out the balance between the film and the stats. Now, Synergy takes it all into one and allows us to have these numbers, and it's great, but looking at the film can be different than looking at the stats. With that knowledge, let's talk about how to be an elite team in transition, first defensively. For me, there are 3 areas of focus. The number one focus to transition defense is communication. Communicating where players are running to, controlling matchups, and being able to not allow any easy scoring opportunities by just simply talking and communicating in transition. The next is to find a balance between going for offensive rebounds and setting up your transition defense. If you have the size advantage, then offensive rebounding can be very impactful, especially at the lower levels like college and high school. 2 important thoughts I have on offensive rebounding is there's not really a lot of correlation between offensive rebounding and winning in the NBA in particular, because this year the top 2 teams in offensive rebounding percentage were the New York Knicks and the Cleveland Cavaliers. Also, committing more players to offensive rebounds leave your transition defense vulnerable, since if you don't get the rebound, you could be looking at an immediate disadvantage, and typically the players going for offensive rebounds are going to be bigs or bigger players. This is a prime example of why the 76ers struggled so much against the Celtics. They did okay offensive rebounding, but the times they couldn't capitalize on those boards, they proceeded to get killed in transition defense. The last factor in building a great transition defense is just to not turn the ball over, but specifically live ball turnovers. Live ball turnovers are turnovers during the live play, or where you give the ball to the other team so they can attack the other way. Live ball turnovers essentially throw your transition defense completely out of whack, since you are unable to set your defense, and it creates opportunities for miscommunications as well as cross matches or switches that favor the offense. In the series between the Celtics and Raptors, this might be my primary focus, and it may be the thing that impacts the transition game more than anything else. The Celtics rank 6th in the NBA, only turning the ball over 13.6% of the time, while the Raptors defense forces a turnover 16.7% of the time, good for 2nd in the NBA, only behind the insanely hyper-aggressive Chicago Bulls ball screen trapping defense. The battle for transition comes down to 2 main things in my opinion. Can the Raptors force turnovers against the Celtics offense that normally takes care of the ball? And will the Celtics be able to slow down the Raptors' transition scoring? Offensively, the Toronto Raptors excel in transition as we discussed, but their half-court offense is middle of the road, ranking 17th according to Cleaning the Glass. Middle of the pack at effective field goal percentage as well as turnover percentage at 14th and 15th in the NBA respectively. They're not a great offensive rebounding team at 24% of their misses, possibly due to not crashing and setting up their defense, something that I need to dive in way more in film when I have time over the next few weeks. And they rank 9th free throw rate, or in other words, they draw fouls very well. When looking at synergy play types, which has its flaws like we kind of talked about, especially when recording data, the only notable thing that I took stock in is they rank 6th in after timeout specials, which isn't always the case because an after timeout special could be a transition score and they log that as an after timeout, with Nick Nurse running some really great actions out of timeouts. On the other side of the ball, let's talk about the Celtics defense. The Celtics defense ranked 4th in defensive efficiency, and looking at the 4 factors, the Celtics ranked 4th in effective field goal percentage, holding teams to 51.1% shooting. They forced turnovers 15.4% of the time, the 6th best team in the NBA. They struggled with rebounding, giving up 25.6 offensive rebounds, or 1 out of every 4 possessions, and they tend to foul more than other teams, ranking 22nd in free throw rate at 21.6. It makes sense if a higher turnover team fouls more. It means you generally have a more aggressive defense, which would lead to more fouling. When researching the synergy play types, I looked and found anything notable, and the Celtics ranked 20th in post-up defense that included pass-outs, an area the Raptors ranked in the top 10 in, finishing 9th. I don't think this will be much of a game-changing stat, considering the Raptors only post up 7% of the time, but it might be a weakness the Raptors look to exploit at times, particularly if the Celtics start to switch more on defense than normal. The big focus I'm going to be watching in the half-court offense is the Raptors attacking the rim, and if the Celtics can contain them. This year, the Raptors ranked 3rd in the NBA shots in the rim, getting there 38% of the time, while the Celtics only allowed 33% of their shots at the rim, good for 8th in the NBA. So that's a battle that I'm going to be paying attention to. Let's go to the Celtics offense that finished 4th in the NBA with an offensive rating of 113.6. The 4 factors for their offense, starting off with effective field goal percentage, that they are below average in. They only shot 53.2% from the field, ranking 18th in the NBA. We discussed their ability to limit turnovers, ranking 6th in the NBA at turnover percentage at 13.6. They are a good offensive rebounding team, rebounding their misses back 27.1% of the time, good for 5th in the NBA. Getting to the free throw line is key to any great offense, and the Celtics get there 21% of the time, ranking 10th in the NBA. We talked about the Celtics transition offense, ranking 5th in the NBA, and using synergies data, we see the Celtics are a great isolation scoring team, which typically in the playoffs are forced more often than not, and especially more in the regular season. But passing out of isolation has been a bit of an issue for the Celtics. It drops from 5th to 11th. Since the Raptors have an aggressive help defense, this could be an area the Raptors do well in. Other areas the Celtics do well in is post-up scoring as well as pick and rolls, including pass and creation, ranking 5th in the NBA in both those areas. The Toronto Raptors defense excels in almost every way possible. As we previously mentioned, their transition defense ranking 1st in the NBA, but their overall defense is ranked 2nd, only behind the elite Milwaukee Bucks defense. The 4 factors breakdown rank the Raptors 2nd in effective field goal percentage, holding teams to 50.6% shooting. 2nd in turnover percentage, like we talked about, creating turnovers, and when it comes to the Celtics turnovers, forcing a turnover 16.7% of the time. They struggle with defensive rebounding, ranking 21st, allowing the offense to rebound their own miss back 26% of the time. The Celtics might exploit this area since they ranked 5th in the NBA in offensive rebound percentage, but this will be extremely intriguing to see the Celtics strategy when it comes to attacking the offensive glass versus setting up their transition defense. Lastly, we touched on the free throw rate being middle of the road at 20.3 free throws per 100 possessions. That ranks 16th in the NBA. Diving into the synergy data, the only weakness is ranking 8th in ball screen handler scores, which could be interesting since the Celtics have Kemba and Jason Tatum, who are elite scorers out of the pick and roll, both ranking in the top 10 scoring out of the pick and roll. An interesting note about the Raptors defense is that they give up the most percentage of threes in the NBA, allowing teams to shoot them 41% of the time. With the Celtics in the middle of the pack at attempting threes at 35.8% of the time, the Raptors' defensive identity allows threes because they stop you from taking shots at the rim, only allowing shots at the rim 32.8% of the time. Ultra-aggressive help and forcing you to earn everything by playing through lots of arms and bodies is going to be interesting to see how many threes the Celtics opt to take versus attacking the rim. On the season, the Celtics went 3-1 against the Raptors, with the last meeting in the bubble being a huge win for the Celtics. But this is the playoffs, and it's two entirely different teams that both swept their opening opponents. I look forward to seeing the battle for transition take place between these two teams. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like and subscribe. I look forward to doing more.